Well, Seymour?
This mailbox is mine, and this triagonal sign.
Okay, so
We had approximately 70.
Kiribati. It's pronounced Kiribati. For some
I made it, despite your directions.
Ah, Superintendent.
That blue balloon, the month of June, they're mine, 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 mine. Ziggy sweets.
that'll be one rancid meat patty on a moldy bun with wilted lettuce on the side.
3,560.
weird reason, the TI makes an S.
Chalmers, welcome. I hope you're prepared for an unforgettable luncheon.
Ah.
Oh, you gods! My roast is ruined! But what if I were to purchase fast food and disguise it as my own cooking? Delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Are mine. That birdie's tweets are mine. The city street.
You once spoiled.
New people request Carnotaurus, and one of our viewers, Henry, was nice enough to send
Sound.
Both of your feet, they're all emphatically mine. It all belongs to me. Everything that I see.
Ketchup with that?
Well, everything looks good and rotten. I don't know what.
That's my boy. Only been here a few weeks and already working the instant water like a pro.
It takes me hours to rot food at home. I've always said.
in this beautiful sculpture.
It's time to learn geography.
No!
Hey everybody, I'm your host Barbs. Woo! Finally, we've added another country to the Oceania playlist to keep Australia and Fiji company. How you guys doing back there?
We're doing just fine!
Great! I am so...
With these crazy explanations, the superintendent's
North, south,
Aldrin was gifted.
Yeah, and look at that cool paper hat he gets to wear.
Give me a break. Anyone can work at Buzzburger. If I had a job, it'd be way cooler.
Yeah, but would you get to wear a cool paper hat?
Paper hat, please. My hat would be, a sombrero.
Of Carnotaurus. Like, I want to call it a statue.
I'm excited because Kiribati is a country that very few people even know exists, which makes the perfect transition into... When it comes to time zones, no country compares to the sheer...
gonna need his medication when he hears Skinner's.
east and west. I caress it, 'cause I possess it. I'm stingy.
Oh, cool! You'd work in a Mexican restaurant?
No, I'm gonna be a famous mariachi rock star.
It's not really a toy anymore. It's so
confusion that is Kiribati. Let's explain. First of all, the country is made up of 33 island atolls and reefs. A third are located in the region of Micronesia, and 2/3 in what is technically classified as the oceanic region of Polynesia. Over 40% of the landmass belongs to Kiribati Island, the largest atoll in the world, which has all those webby, pockety lake things going on, making it look like a weird alien claw or like a slimy...
Lame exaggerations, there'll be trouble in town tonight.
Seymour!
And it's mine. And this instrumental break is also mine. The floor and ceiling are mine. All your feelings are mine. You always knew it. That's all there is to it. It's mine, 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 mine. That's what I said.
It'll be bug-tastic. I'll make millions and trillions of dollars.
Gee, I am so...
pretty. This is probably the most accurate toy we've had on the show.
Insect with... Yo, Ken, what do you call those bugs with, like, pinchers on their butts? Yeah, dude, I'm pretty sure...
Superintendent.
It's mine.
Jealous, Maggie. Just imagine, there you'll be with all of your fake money, and all I'll have is this measly wad of real money to, wipe away my tears.
Aldrin thinks he's so
You've seen
I was just stretching.
cool with his real job and his real money. Well, I'll show you.
far. If you look at this, you would come away with the various features that you would want to know about Carnotaurus. You've got the short.
them. They're like the worst bugs.
Oh, earwigs. That's what they are. Oh, I hate those things.
By the way, Kiribati is the native way of pronouncing Christmas. So
My calves on the windowsill. Isometric exercise. Care to join me?
Why is there smoke?
Then I'll get an even better real job with even better real money.
Why don't you try and get a job working here at Le Termite?
Why would I want to work at a restaurant for a bunch of wood-eating termites?
Because you can wash dishes with me. Think about it. You can wash and I can dry. Or I can wash and you can dry. Or we can both wash and we can both dry. We'll be like the Dish Sisters.
Deep snout.
yes, this place, this alien claw slimy.
Coming out of your oven, Seymour.
It'll be awesome.
In a world where no dish is clean, cleaning up the city one dish at a time. The Dish Sisters.
The two horns on its head, the tiny arms, the athletic long legs, the muscular tail, and the rows of ridged scoots.
Earwig Larva Island is called Christmas Island, not to be confused with Australia's Christmas Island. The country is made up of 3 main island chains, the 16...
Oh, that isn't smoke.
Inspired by actual events.
The Dish Sisters?
Running down its back. It's exactly the kind of toy I would like to see.
Gilbert or Kiribati Islands, the Phoenix or Rawaki Islands, made up of 8 atolls and 2 submerged
It's steam.
I know it sounds.
On this show.
reefs, and the Line Islands, 8 of which belong to Kiribati, and the remaining 3, Palmyra Atoll, Jarvis Island, and Kingman Reef, belong to the US as minor outlying island territories. Then you have the little offshoot Banaba Island that just kind of wandered off and doesn't really fit into any of the chains. The capital of the country is located on Tarawa Atoll, where about half of the entire population lives. By the way, quick side...
Steam.
Lame. But if you could have been in my head just now, you'd be like, whoa.
Nothing personal, Rena, but my job needs to be loads better than Aldrin's. I'm afraid I'll just have to keep looking.
They'll have 2 mansions, 1 country estate, and a couple of 2x4s for the kids to nosh on while we're waiting. Oh, and here's a big wad of money for you for no reason.
God, don't be silly.
That doesn't mean that there aren't things wrong with it that I'm going to talk about. Also, Carnotaurus is probably the most recently discovered dinosaur we've had on the show.
Note the word Kiribati is just the pronunciation of Gilbert's in the native language. Most of the inhabited islands have airstrips for small...
From the steamed...
There's a reason. We're rich.
I think I've looked far enough.
Le Termite is the finest termite restaurant in all of Sticky Feet.
It was discovered in 1984, described 1985 and 1990, all by Jose Bonaparte, from Argentina, if that might have been redundant since...
domestic flights. However, the country has 2 international airports. The largest one that most people fly into, Tarawa's Bonriki International, and then there's Kiritimati's Cassidy International, served...
Clams we're having. Steam.
I will settle.
It would be easier to name dinosaurs from Argentina that Jose Bonaparte has not named, because it was so...
by Fiji and Hawaii. Outside of Tarawa Island, the next most populated areas are Tabuakea on Kiritimati and Makin Village on Makin Island, each with only about 2,000 people on them. Now here's where things get really trippy. Kiribati's island chains pass through both the international dateline and the equator. This makes them the only country in the world to straddle...
Clams.
Ooh.
Superintendent.
Nothing but the best. You call this crown molding?
Pardon me, sir.
Recently discovered, Carnotaurus never had to go through that phase that a lot of the other dinosaurs on this show.
across 4 hemispheres.
I hope you're ready for mouth-watering hamburgers.
I thought we were having steamed...
But I'm here for the best job in the place.
That's what the head chef.
Great, I'll take it.
I'm the head chef.
So
Have gone through where they're, depicted as plotting lizard Godzilla monsters. That said...
Oh my... France, just let them have this one, I swear.
Clams.
No, I said...
what else you got?
We are looking for a waitress. Do you have any waiting experience?
Duh, I'm still...
Carnotaurus is often portrayed more like a standard.
Now, you would think that being past the anti-meridian would mess up the country's week schedule. I mean, 2/3 of the country would be stuck
steamed.
Waiting for you to give me a job. Hello?
Whatever that means, theropod with 2 horns on its head, which isn't fair to it. Even back in the late 80s, early 90s, when workers were still
in yesterday, as the remainder would be forever in Tomorrowland, right? Well, in 1995, they got sick
Hams. That's what I call hamburgers.
You call hamburgers steamed.
lumping all large theropods into Carnosauria, which we now know is not accurate. But even with that broad brush that they were painting with in the early 90s, they recognized that there was a difference between the meat eaters that they were finding in the southern.
the confusion, and they changed it to UTC plus 13 for the Phoenix Islands, which Tonga, Tokelau, and Samoa.
Hams.
Yes, it's a regional dialect.
What region?
Upstate New York.
Really? Well, I'm from Utica, and I've never heard anyone use the phrase steamed.
Hemisphere and the meat eaters that they found in the north. See,
respectively joined, and the furthest extending one, UTC plus 14, just for the Line Islands, which are just south.
Hams.
Oh, not in Utica. No, it's an Albany expression.
I see.
Congratulations. You are our new gopher. You are fired. What? Oh, y'all hear from my lawyer?
In your face, Aldrin. I'm a gopher. So,
this is from the Cerro Barcino Formation, which is about 83 million years ago to 70
of Hawaii, Caroline Island being the furthest east of these, even though nobody lives on it. Both of these overlap the UTC minus 10 and 11 time zones. So that means that every morning, Kiribati is literally the first country to start.
You know, these hamburgers are quite similar.
oh, what does a gopher do?
2 million years ago. So
every day, or at least the Line Islands of Kiribati.
Didn't you say
the ones they have at Krusty Burger?
Oh, no. Patented Skinner.
Goes for this and goes for that. Now get going! Hey, gopher! Clear table 4, now!
Hey, gopher, get me a new apron. This one has a spot.
this would have been a contemporary of Gorgosaurus and Daspletosaurus and Parasaurolophus and Chasmosaurus and that group of dinosaurs in North America, but it would never have met them because South
Japan was the land of the rising sun?
Burgers, old family recipe.
4 steamed.
On it. And you didn't want to be dish sisters.
America was isolated at this time. So
good observation, but Kiribati is the land at the first dawn.
Oh, shut.
Hams.
Yes.
Yes, and you call them steamed.
I'll be one now.
Too late. We could have been great.
Who am I kidding? My job's even lamer than Aldrin's.
Oh, cheer up, my little gopher. Here is your first day's pay. Oh, wait. There's taxes. So
the animals were getting very strange.
Down.
You're so
Hams, despite the fact they are obviously grilled.
You know, one thing I should... Excuse me for 1 second.
security?
There, we talked last time about endemism, the uniqueness of animals in different parts of the world. The late Cretaceous, we saw...
good at this, Keith. Which is weird because the same...
Of course.
Oh, well, that was wonderful. Good time was had by all. I'm pooped.
Yes, I should.
And Fika.
There's my little worker.
How'd my girl do on her first day?
I think I'm gonna quit.
Look who just walked in, but Quitter Quitinsky. Hey, it's Quitterella, back from the ball.
Let me finish. I was saying...
high diversity. We saw sun.
Good Lord, what is happening in there?
Aurora Borealis?
Aurora Borealis. At this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within your kitchen.
Yes.
that I'm gonna quit looking for another job because I've already found the perfect one.
Wonderful!
They liked me so.
Very different animals, even between the two Americas. Carnotaurus is a good example of this. The theropods that you see
later rises on some...
It? No.
Seymour! Much, they made me head waitress.
Congratulations, sis!
in America were fluffy. They were coelurosaurs. They were the tyrannosaurs, which we now know would have probably had proto-feathers. Whereas Carnotaurus is the poster child for a scaly...
Islands further west, like American Samoa.
The house is on fire!
No, Mother, it's just the Northern Lights.
Well, Seymour...
But if you're a waitress, why are you covered in sawdust?
Large body theropod. This was the first theropod, non-avian theropod, that we found with skin.
Midway and Niue, yet since...
You are an odd fellow, but I must say...
Because I'm so...
Impressions. The holotype had skin...
They lie on the UTC-11 zone, they are considered to be 25 hours behind. And if anybody was living on the uninhabited Howland and Baker Islands and Johnston Atoll in the latest time zones UTC-12, they would be considered 26...
You steam...
Popular that they threw sawdust...
Impressions all along the side...
Hours behind. So...
A good ham.
On me, like confetti, shouting...
of its body. It even had it on the head, but we destroyed it digging up the skull.
That means...
Hooray for Maggie!
That's my girl!
But where's your hat?
Puke,
because we didn't realize what we had at the time. That happens sometimes.
If you can keep up with me, every day for technically 2 hours, there can be 3 days happening at once. So...
Jobs are so...
But it's a good thing we have those skins.
Anywho, 21 of the islands are inhabited, all 16...
Cool, you don't even need a hat.
Yeah, whatever.
I think we should...
Impressions, because without them, we wouldn't know about these rows of armor-ridged scales.
The Gilberts, Banaba, 1 in the Phoenix Islands, Canton Island, and 3 in the Line Islands, Taraina, Tabuairan, and Kiritimati, the alien claw slimy...
Go visit Maggie at work tomorrow to show...
Going down its back. It was photographs in the original description, as well as a description by the sculptor.
Earwig Island. Finally, each of the inhabited islands have their own council, with 3 on Tarawa. Whew! Alright, well, some
our support.
Stephen.
Notable places to check out in case you decide to come to Kiribati might include places like Whenua Ura, the Curvy Parliament Building, the National Library and Archives, the Koinava and Sacred...
The way you all did for me. Who knows? Maybe I could actually learn something.
Cherkas. That explains what these would have looked like. It would have had over most of its body standard
Heart cathedrals, Yatari Karawa and Buraneita traditional meeting houses, the ruins of Malden and Starbuck
from my little sister.
Dinosaurian scales.
Islands, Yorore and Butaritari navigational stones.
No, that won't be necessary. Besides, all the food's made of wood. You wouldn't even like it.
Maggie, it's not about the food. It's about showing...
Reticula, tuberculate scales.
Mandra Island prehistoric settlement.
How proud we are of you.
Because we love you.
You really shouldn't.
Which looks like what you have on the bottom of a bird's foot, or on the bottom of this toy's feet. And those would have been about ½ a centimeter in size.
The Nake Island Mare Temple platform, the abandoned post office of Orona Island. Oh, and if you play Call of Duty, Makin Island was featured on World at War. World War II remnants at Betio, and literally almost everywhere you go, you'll be within a few meters of an amazing beach, typically laid out on rich, unspoiled coral reefs. Like, literally the entire width of some...
Love me so.
But then they would have been interrupted in irregular rows by much larger, like 10 times larger, ridged scales.
Parts of the country are only like a few meters wide. Let's dive more into that in. Okay, let's just get it over with. Like many other Pacific Island nations, Kiribati is kind of dealing with a problem of sinking.
Much. Hey, pretty lady. Remember how yesterday I got you a clean apron? Well, you've probably been wondering, how in the world can I repay that adorable Maggie Pesky?
Beat it, gopher.
Okay, but first will you let me do your job for a few minutes?
I said...
That's sort of...
Like, already 2 islands have been swallowed.
Beat it!
Yes, ma'am!
Resemble the armor on the back of a crocodile, and the scales...
By the Pacific Ocean. Even though the country spans...
How good I am at taking orders? Hey, did you know you've got spots?
Like on this toy, would be getting larger as you approach the top of the animal. And it's really a shame...
The domain of over 2 million square...
All over the back of your uniform? Oh no! Here, I'll help you.
Yeah, hurry back with the clean one, Gopher.
Gopher? What gopher?
Pesky, party of 4.
It's Lish showtime.
That we lost those skin
kilometers of ocean, the land area only takes up about 800 square.
And finally, we have a delicious Tuscan villa.
Ooh, I love Italian food. We'll take that.
Back in a jiffy.
Hey, Maggie, I'm sorry.
Impressions from the head because the head presents a little bit of a mystery. There's this ridged texture on the nasal bones, which is usually restored this way, like on the toy, where it's got these keratin spikes.
Kilometers. Kiribati is one of the world's lowest lying nations. In fact, when Hiram Bingham Jr., a Christian missionary, first translated the Bible into the native language, he had trouble translating the word for mountain since...
For doubting you there, I just thought you were showing
but it's also sometimes
the natives had never seen
me up, and it wasn't right of me to...
Would you hurry it up? You're not my only table.
Oh, right.
Excuse me, miss. We're ready to order.
I'm not your waitress.
We've been waiting for 10 minutes, and if you don't take our order, I am getting the manager.
What'll it be, folks?
Where is Maggie Pesky? We are drowning in sawdust.
been restored as just a wrinkly texture skin.
Now here's the thing. A lot of islands in the Pacific are a little different from most of the other islands around the world because they're very skinny.
Back here!
We'll have the...
You got it. I'll be right back with that.
Gopher! Clean up this sawdust!
Or even some...
The word for these types of flat, wispy, enclosed ovular types of islands are called atolls, and Kiribati is mostly made up of them. The highest point of the country being only 81 meters above sea.
What do you think I'm doing? Sure.
Kind of comb. But the keratin spikes
level on Banaba Island, which is actually a raised coral island, so...
Zach not pretending to be a waitress, I'll tell you that much.
Hey, your tables need clearing.
I'm on it.
Hey, we never finished ordering. We're starving.
Make the most sense.
They got lucky. Otherwise, the majority of the rest of the islands only rise about 2 to 6.
There you go, compliments of the house. I'll bet Aldrin never had to work this hard.
Well, hi there, Raina. Have you seen...
Really, especially if you consider the things it might be using the horns on its head for. A final note on integument, this toy has what you see
meters above sea.
Maggie, we ordered a while ago.
I think she's...
in a lot of theropods, which is the bird-like scoots.
This is kind of a problem because rising sea...
Getting a promotion from the head chef.
Well, wouldn't want to bother her then. Good evening, sir.
On the foot. There actually isn't much evidence for those showing
levels, or king tides as they call it, in the past century have completely inundated parts of the coast, forcing people to either move out or build seawall.
Why, thank you, fellow adult. Carry on.
Gopher!
Where's my broom?
Try the closet. Hey, where's my uniform? White cat?
Not yet. I haven't painted the shutters.
up outside of the birds because developmentally, those scoots
barricades along their homes. Some
This Spanish
are suppressed.
Estimate that in about 50 years, the problem will be too devastating and the majority of the people in Kiribati may have to be relocated abroad. One excellent way some
flight feathers. So
residents are battling the problem, though, is through mangrove planting. The bushy plants are able to grow in seawater.
House is underdone. Where's all the stucco?
Unless the animal is descended from a creature that had flight feathers on its feet, it's probably not going to have those scoots.
And act as a natural barricade for waves. On top of that, there are virtually no rivers and only a few small...
I am starving!
It would just have those reticulated scales.
Ponds that store...
I tell you, you can't fill up on toothpicks.
Oh, to heck with it.
You are ruining it!
What are you doing in my uniform?
Now, I bet you wish you had a cool hat.
No! I can explain. You boy.
Excuse me, Are you folks done with this table?
Maggot, pesky, fastil.
All over the foot. Another comparison we can make with tyrannosaurids is the tail, and to an extent the legs. There were two researchers who in 2010 did a rather popular study.
Fresh water. Most people here get fresh water through wells or boreholes, rain collection, and there are two small...
Had a restaurant to fire you from.
Hooray for Maggie.
Do you mind telling me why you had to go and ruin my job for me?
Why'd you have to lie about having a better job than me? I had to work very hard to get where I am. Do you think they let just anyone work the instant rotter? No. I started...
About the tail muscles of Tyrannosaurus and how those would help it with its locomotion. They followed that up with a study.
Desalinization plants on Banaba and Tarawa. Otherwise, seawater...
With the worst job of all, working the fly-through window.
Your total is $13.60.
On Carnotaurus in 2011. Well, really a study.
It's mostly used for bathing, laundry, and toilets. I mean, it's okay if you have salt.
Please move forward. Look, Maggie, no more dishes, and I get to wear a cool hat.
The point is, you gotta work your way up the hard way.
Well, do you think they might have a job here for me? I'll do anything.
You'll have to ask my new boss, Mr. F.
Maggot, pesky, sacre bleu!
On many abelisaurids or carnotaurines. The caudal ribs on the tail vertebra of Carnotaurus are ridiculous. In most dinosaurs, those are just simple...
If you're not drinking it. The majority of their energy also, unfortunately, comes from diesel-run generators. This causes another problem for them as they have to have a constant supply of
rod-like structures
of import that's required to keep their country afloat. Only about 60%
that extend laterally out from the sides
of the entire country has access to electricity. On top of that, solid
the vertebra. In Carnotaurus and in other derived carnotaurines and abelisaurids, they're these broad blade-like structures.
Waste management is a problem with the little space
that extend diagonally upwards. Now, what in the world would those be for? Well, they have muscle scars.
They have. A recycling center opened up on Tarawa, and island-wide cleanup campaigns have been initiated. However, it's a slow
on the bottoms. So
process.
Jeez, everything you said.
They're anchoring this huge muscle called caudofemoralis longus, which attaches to the back of the femur. Now, that is interpreted by the researchers as an adaptation for pulling the leg back. And that shows up in all theropods, but in Carnotaurus, they are ridiculously huge. They're the largest proportional to their body of any known theropod. So when you have the tail that's, you know, about the same...
A little kind of morbid. Do you have anything positive to say?
Width as the hip bones, that's an animal that's not going to be able to run. You need to have it wider than the hip bones, and by some...
About the country?
Ken, why are you not operating the camera?
I just wanted more lines in the episode.
Oh, you like being on camera, eh?
Well, I mean, you know, if you, whatever you like, I mean, whatever.
Okay, you know what? Fine. Here, take this next part, okay? See...
Estimates, if you're not being too conservative, much wider than the hip bones. So
if you can keep up with the teleprompter.
Okay. For one, the entire Phoenix Island chain is a protected marine area, the third largest in the Pacific after the Pitcairn Marine Island, and Hawaii's Papahana
Umo Marine National Monument.
Papahana Umo Kaukea Marine National Monument.
There, you got it. Yeah, it's not as easy as you thought it was, huh?
No, I got this. Now, of course, as an island nation, they have more than enough fish and seafood.
Really, the tail isn't just a counterweight. It's a lever. It creates a moment arm around the hip joint to pull the leg back to propel the animal forward. There's a trade-off in that, though. As you tilt those caudal ribs upwards, you have less room for the muscles that need to go on top of them. And those are the muscles that keep the tail stable.
After their diet.
The solution
specialties
that abelisaurids came up with was to interlock their caudal ribs, which stiffens
being crayfish and giant clam. They are known for producing lots of toddy, which is made into a sweet
the tail, but reduces its ability to flex. So
syrup.
In a simplified...
They could also be fermented into alcohol. Otherwise, they harvest giant swamp.
RPG-like way, they were trading maneuverability for raw acceleration. Because instead of doing that serpentine
taro, breadfruit, of course coconuts, figs, and pandanus.
Panda anus.
Woo, for such
flexi turning thing that other theropods would be able to do, they were instead, it would be like trying to turn quickly while carrying a long board parallel to the ground. Now that implies some small things about the environment in which they were living. That tells us that they probably didn't need to be super
country. We're getting a lot of cool info, aren't we? And it gets even more fascinating once we talk about people, which brings us to I don't know how you do it, like
that's going in the video. Good job, man. Let's give Ken a round of applause. All right, I'll take it from here. By now, you can probably feel how unique Kiribati is on the surface.
Maneuverable. That means that they weren't, living in a dense forest. They were out on a floodplain, for example. As of 2013, the abelisaurids in South.
But when you meet all the actual people, it's like a whole new level of wonder. First of all, the country has about 110,000 people, and unless efforts are made to fortify their land, the 60%
of America are grouped into the Carnotaurines, and they are more closely related to each other than they are to the abelisaurids elsewhere, which go all the way from India, Madagascar area to France and Morocco, and those are the Majungasaurids. Now, because the specimen
percent of the country that is under 30 years old is speculated
of Carnotaurus was incomplete, we don't have any of the leg below the knee, but based on a related animal called Allosaurus, we know that the Carnotaurines were probably leggier than the abelisaurids elsewhere in Gondwana. So the leg that huge caudofemoralis longus muscle was pulling back on was long enough to produce a speedster.
To possibly be the last generation to live on the islands before potential relocation. The vast majority of the people at about 97
a pursuit predator, as opposed to what we figure the rest of the abelisaurids were, which is ambush predators, animals that were capable of lunging but not really of sprinting.
% identify as being the E. Kiribati branch of the Micronesian ethnicity, similar
and it looks like the lunging ability rather than the sprinting
to their neighbors like the Marshallese and Palauans. The remainder is made up of a small
ability was the ancestral condition of abelisaurids, which is interesting because that might be how they were able to survive.
Community of Polynesians, mostly Tuvaluans, and Imatang, the word for Westerners or whites, mostly of British and American descent. They also use two forms of currency, the Kiribati dollar and the Australian dollar. They use the type I plug outlet, and they drive on the left side.
In the early Cretaceous, when they were living in the shadow
of the road, with whatever little roads they do have. E. Kiribati people come from a long history of seafarers.
Of, the giant carnosaurs and the giant megalosaurs, they were able to be ambush predators going after the smaller
that have historically inhabited the island since
faster animals. Then, once the big giants die out, and they have to go after the slightly
possibly around 3000 BC. Culture-wise, it's a little unique because Kiribati is kind of like the bridge between Micronesia and Polynesia. Don't get the two mixed up though. At one point they were even united with Tuvalu under the British, but after independence the Tuvaluans were like, okay, look Kiribati, we're Polynesians, we don't even understand your language very well, plus we want to stay.
Larger animals, they develop pursuit abilities. And I think the legs are a little too short.
The Commonwealth, so we're peacing out.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not gonna stop.
The calves are too beefy, at least. And I don't know of any studies.
You go ahead.
Okay, I don't even need your permission, okay? I was gonna leave anyway.
Yeah, okay.
Fine.
All right.
Okay, just so you know, I'm leaving because we're too different from each other.
I get that!
Maybe a little exaggerated, but you get the point. The country is mostly bilingual with both the E. Kiribati language, or Gilbertese, and English. Gilbertese is a Micronesian language, part of the Austronesian language family, a cousin of Micronesian and Marshallese, but not Palauan. Palauans may be their cousins, but they have a whole different language thing going on. The alphabet only has 13 letters and no S's.
On intermetatarsal movement in a ceratosaur, but the foot here looks like it's twisted a little too much, which might just be what they had to do to get it into this nice dramatic pose, but it doesn't seem like something
they substitute
its foot would be able to do, at least not without hurting itself. I like how the feet are deforming against the ground. It implies the weight of the creature. It was only a medium-sized theropod by Cretaceous standards, but that's comparing it to Tyrannosaurus rex, where it's only a quarter size
the S
of the Tyrannosaurus rex. But that's still
with a TI for some
a really big carnivore. And with all that talk about pursuit predation, you're probably wondering what they were pursuing. And to answer that, we need to look at faunal turnover in the late Cretaceous. The Americas before the Cenomanian-Turonian boundary were pretty much an exaggeration of the animals that we saw.
Hence Kiribati. In Kiribati, it's kind of a big deal to identify yourself based off of which island you're from. People in the Gilberts are kind of like the metropolitan business folk. The Line Islands are kind of like the cool, adventurous people. And the very few Phoenix Islanders on that one inhabited island, Canton, they're kind of seen
in the late Jurassic. Now, after that boundary, the giant predators disappear. They're either rare or absent. It was the ceratosaurs, the mid-sized abelisaurids that took the top spot
is like the mystical shepherds
as apex predators. What it was hunting was small
of the protected marine sanctuary
to medium-sized ornithopods, derived titanosaurs like the saltosaurids.
Like many other Pacific Island nations, towns typically erect a traditional multifunctional communal meeting structure.
And we had thyreophorans, which were getting weird because they were no longer stegosaurs.
Here known as a manayaba. In Kiribati, they're typically high-ceilinged, open-walled, thatched roof gazebos that host various events and meetings. The majority of Kiribati identify as Christians, about half being Catholic, 40% Protestant, and the remainder being mostly Mormon and Baha'i. Yeah, the Mormons have quite a distinct presence in the Pacific Island nations. History will take way too long to explain, but in the quickest way I can put it, earliest inhabitants come in migrating possibly from other Micronesian and Polynesian areas, various wars and battles with neighboring nations like Samoa.
They were ankylosaurs. The device with which it hunted those animals? This weird head, for which it is named. It's Carnotaurus, which means meat bull, based on how it has meat-eater teeth and bull-like horns. The head is so
Tonga and Fiji, intermarrying with said
astonishingly squat.
Samoan.
It's deep, but there's almost as much head behind the eye as there is head in front of the eye. In fact, this toy might have too long of a snout.
Tongans and Fijians, which in return may have introduced certain cultural traits. This guy sails.
It's definitely too wide. The head should be narrower side to side.
They take note, word spreads.
It does have some
tons of missionaries, Chinese and Samoans.
Binocular field of view on the eyes, not as much as if a Tyrannosaur would have, but still
merchants and castaways stop.
Respectable binocular field of view. It can see you.
The British were like, okay, time to make this a protector along with the Ellice Islands. Meanwhile, the Phoenix and Line Island chains were operated under the US, then they weren't, then they kind of were again. Tons of natives move into the Phoenix and Line Islands. The Japanese came in and tried to take over. Big mistake. Huge battle called the Battle of Tarawa. Japanese leave. Controversy with the United States.
What it's biting. Its mouth did have this odd upward curve in the front. You see that in some
UK using areas around Christmas Island for nuclear bomb testing, self-rule
other abelisaurids, but none so
1960
pronounced as in Carnotaurus, which is going to be a running theme here. The teeth are accurately unimpressive. It would have had relatively weak teeth. It made up for those weak tooth crowns by having an overbuilt skull. And its skull,
finally in 1970,
was actually a little bit mobile. It could open its mouth on the top relative to the back of its head. So
they break away from the British, gain independence. 4 years later, the US relinquishes the Phoenix and Line Islands to them. Overcrowding problems forced about 5,000 people to move to other islands. International dateline moved, UN membership, and here we are today. Now, one thing that makes Kiribati stick
get a slightly
out from the other neighbors is that historically they were known for having a very unique warfare and martial arts culture. Back in the 17th,
wider gape without having to move its eyes. Also helping with the gape is that up curve in the front. And when I say
then 18th centuries, explorers noticed and documented curiously dressed warriors with armor made of thickly woven coconut fibers and helmets made out of resilient blowfish carcasses, topped with a wide array of weapons like jagged broadswords lined with sharks.
Gape, that's how wide it can open its mouth, which directly affects how large of an animal it can engage. So
that actually looks so.
We have this picture of a very specialized.
Cool, it's like the ultimate oceanic island warrior getup. I love it. Otherwise, fascinating, colorful dances, music, and traditions live on. Dances typically involve quick head movements that imitate a bird. During celebrations, you might witness the stirere stick,
or at least unique head that's acting as a blunt instrument to be propelled by the legs and tail into whatever it's aiming at. The horns on top of that head I have seen
dance, especially on the biggest holiday, July 12th, their Independence Day. The Kiribati also live by a unique code called bubuts. It's a system
pretty much restored every which way. The bony cores are not this blade-like. They actually have, if you look at them in front view, they have a parabolic cross-section. This restoration shows
which you kind of have to let someone
them coming to a point. I've seen
borrow something.
Restorations where they're just nubs. I've seen
if they ask you and it's shameful.
Restorations where they're pointing forward like a bowl. I'm sure
if you refuse their request, unless of the context of the situation.
All have their reasons. I haven't seen
really says
any real literature on what shape
otherwise. And the reason why is because generally E. Kiribati are very communal. They have to survive
is most likely. I've seen
together on a limited space.
A little bit of literature on what it might be using them for, however. Horns are not uncommon in the theropods, especially in the ceratosaurs, but Carnotaurus has the largest by far. So
that's washing away. You can't not help someone.
It must have been important to it. The most obvious answer is display. If you're investing all of those resources into growing horns, that's showing
who's drowning in the same
how healthy and fit of an individual you are, both to potential rivals and to potential mates. They could very well be for intraspecific combat. You know, there's reconstructions of them rutting like deer to compete for mates or to compete for territory. I haven't seen
boat you're on. Getting help from friends is definitely something.
Any literature on whether they could use their horns for predation, even though that might make sense.
Ingrained in the mindset of a typical E. Kiribati person, which is why they like to reach out to other countries quite often. Which brings us to Kiribati may have had a few periods of conflict, both direct and indirect, but since
if you're going after prey that's larger than you, even though we don't think it was, I'd like to see
independence, they've been diplomatically reaching out to pretty much anyone that realized they existed. Fiji is considered a good friend whom has sold someone them land and said,
look into that, because I can't think of any other animal that has long sharp
that they will accommodate if the people need to be relocated in the future. They made an agreement of leasing out land to Japan for building a spaceport.
Things on its head other than maybe the saber-toothed
on Christmas Island, but the plans were abandoned in 2013. They used to have relations with China, but then in 2003 they wanted to befriend Taiwan as well. China got angry and said
cats, but that's not really a fair comparison. The neck on this toy might not be robust enough. Now, I realize it looks super beefy, but for example, this dip here is exactly matching a dip that shows
you cannot have both of us and severed
up in the skeleton
ties that very year. Their closest family would be, of course, the other Micronesian states.
Whereas in life, that probably would have been smooth.
The Federated States of Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, Palau, and the 2 U.S. territories of Guam and the Marianas. These countries shared
over by flesh, because in abelisaurids, and especially in Carnotaurus, the neck was exceedingly muscular. There's these bones called epipophyses, or at least they're a process on the bones. It's a part that sticks similar out over the part that articulates with the next neck vertebra. And those are muscle attachment points, and those show
cultures, languages, and history as well. Their best friends, though, would have to be Australia and New Zealand. These countries give them the biggest amount of trade, business, and supply.
Up in all archosaurs, but in the abelisaurs, they're huge. So
them with the most aid. Many programs are in place to help the locals apply for relocation on their lands if need be as well. In conclusion, Kiribati is a small.
We figure that those were anchoring very strongly
at spread
neck muscles, as was the shoulder
country, loaded with history, armed with shark
girdle. It's got these tiny little arms, but this still
toothed sword.
Full-size set
wielding Melanesians that are literally fighting off the ocean. And with that done and said,
of shoulder,
our next set
blades and coracoid bones. So if it wasn't using the shoulder
of twins are coming up, the Koreas, and since
girdle to support,
we go alphabetically, North Korea is coming up next.
The arms, it might have just retained it as an anchor point for its large neck muscles to pilot and aim this blunt instrument of a head. I have mentioned these short little arms repeatedly. Honestly, I think on this toy, they're actually too big. Like, these look like functional arms, which is not what Carnotaurus had. It had vestigial arms. This is very different from what you see in like Tyrannosaurus. Tyrannosaurus had very small arms, but they were still functional. Whereas on Carnotaurus, which, mind you, had the smallest arms of any dinosaur that we know of relative to its body size, the arms below the elbow and possibly below the shoulder were vestigial. They wouldn't have been useful for anything. They've restored it with longer fingers than it probably should have. And the fingers look like they could actually do things, which I don't think is accurate. Also, they've painted 4 claws, which no Archosaur had 4 claws. Even if it had, 4 or 5 fingers, it would have only had maximum 3 claws. We're a little unclear on the actual digit arrangement of Carnotaurus. The skeleton was disarticulated, and usually we would look at, a related animal like Allosaurus or whatever, and we have, but hands in abelisaurids are really weird. See, the mutations started to pile up over the generations. One of its digits was just a spur of bone. This is usually restored as the 4th digit poking back and up. The 3rd digit is actually the longest, and the 1st digit is super tiny. We're not actually sure whether the 3rd digit had a claw, but it looks like it would have. Because they weren't using their arms for predation, in all ceratosaurs you see this pattern of having your arms reduced over time.
The abelisaurids, though, take this to an extreme, especially Carnotaurus. So
there's some kind of pressure within the animal itself, leading it to not invest a lot of resources into the arms. The point I'm trying to get to with all of this is that it's pretty unreasonable to restore the arms with this, implied functionality here. Whereas, you could, at an equal level of unreasonableness, restore them just encased within the flesh of the chest and shoulder area, and then you would save some sculpting
and painting time. So
be smart with how you're going to break with reality. So
Carnotaurus, not just your standard theropod with horns on its head. It's a very unique animal and a very good indicator of the diversity of life in the late Cretaceous. Really, it's an example of what happens when greatness is thrust upon an animal. So it does the best it can within the constraints of its family. I want to thank Henry again for giving us this toy. I will be sending
it back to you presently. Thank you for your patience. And thank all of you for watching Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong. Please comment in with dinosaurs you'd like me to have on the show. You could even send me a dinosaur. Our address is in the description. If you would like your dinosaur back, please indicate that. Now it's kind of